What's up, my dear friends of the world? Paul the Trombonist here, and I'm really excited to share with you a special episode of Bone Masters where I got the privilege to sit down with Kid Ory's daughter, Babette Ory. And we go super in depth. We talk about historical events that I've never seen documented before. We talk about what influenced Kid Ory. And for those of you that aren't familiar, which I'm sure most everyone here is familiar, Kid Ory, I consider him the father of jazz trombone. I think the first improvised jazz trombone solo to ever be recorded is credited to Kid Ory. So I sat down with his daughter. We talked about amazing historical events. And by the end of it, you're going to have a better perspective and insight on the life of Kid Ory. And if you find value in this, be sure to hit like for the YouTube algorithm so other people can share our love of music and the trombone and jazz with the rest of the world. And it's a phone interview, so just sit back, sit down, and let's go on this journey together. Babette, so great to have you here. It is an incredible honor. I wanted to start this off by asking you, do you have any gems of wisdom that your father has shared with you that you'd like to share with us?
Well, whether you're a fan of New Orleans jazz, or you're a fan of jazz at all, or whether you're a player, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that my dad practiced every single day of his life until he was in the hospital. Every single day. Even if he didn't have a gig, he practiced. And if he couldn't be near his horn, he had his mouthpiece. So that was the number one thing, that make sure you always had your chops and that your tone was as good as you could possibly get out, and to make it sweet and have it emote. And he believed that music was something that, you didn't just come to as a genius, that you did have to work at it. And it may seem like, you're a born genius and a born whatever, but in essence, it still takes practice.
So I look at your father, Kid Ory, as probably the most historically significant trombonist and one of the only people that ever really got to hear what Buddy Bolden sounded like. And that's incredible. Buddy Bolden, as historic as he was never recorded. But your father actually would hear him play live. He was one of the only people that I know of that actually heard him physically. Do you have any insight on that?
I think Louis may have heard him in a parade, but by the time Louis came to real prominence, Louis was 16 when he joined my dad's band. He had short pants, a tin cornet, and knew 4 songs. Only 4 songs. He had no shoes to speak of, and my dad said at King Oliver's, request, that he should take his chair because Oliver was going to Chicago. And so my dad gave him marching orders to go get a clean shirt, a tie, shoes, long trousers, not pedal pushers, and look like a dude, which is dude in Creole, and just come back and be at work at 8 o'clock. And Louis, I don't know how he managed it, but he got shoes and pants and a clean white shirt and a tie and a jacket. And he came back and joined my dad's band at 16. So whatever he had heard from, Bolden inspired him to follow King Oliver. And my dad, as you know, and King Oliver have the hottest band in New Orleans. I mean, they're the ones that should have been the first to record jazz music, but the ODJB beat them to it, and the ODJB copyrighted a lot of songs that weren't theirs, such as the music business, and the rest is jazz history. But in 2 years' time, my dad's legacy will come back to life, God willing, if we can raise all this money together to do it and make a plaque in Santa Monica where he did Ory's Creole trombone. And that was historic because he came from New Orleans in 1919 and left in a hurry and came to LA and Oakland via Chicago. He only stayed in Chicago for a very brief minute, and then went to Oakland, then came back to and then came to LA, and he stayed here for most of his life until the late 50s, and then we would start going and visiting secretly the family in New Orleans, and then no one would know that we were in town because we would be met at the train station, and we would be spirited away in a car, and we would stay with the family at home. We wouldn't go out to restaurants or anywhere where he would be recognized because he was still afraid that this man, Pete Lala, who had a club called Lala's, uh, would, have the hit on my dad, which he had tried to do in 1919. That's why my dad left. My dad left because he was making $500 a week in 1919.
Wow.
That was a lot of money. And he was, even though what he learned from Bolden was to stay centered and be a businessman and not be flaky. And so my dad learned that you would rent one hall on one side of the street, and on, the closest dance hall around the corner, you would rent that hall as well. And you'd only play in one hall, and you keep the other hall dark that night so that everyone would have to come to your dance and pay money. And then, he would make sure that he had a handle on a percentage of all the drinks that were sold and any food that was sold, just like Kermit Ruffins does these days. He has his food at his club, and his backyard, his barbecue, and and so the tradition carries on in New Orleans, but now it's more legitimized. But back then it was like a wildcat music scenario. Like you play a cutting contest on a corner, and you try and cut the other people down with how good you sound and how loud you are. And you tie yourself to their back of their wagon, because they would be sitting on a wagon. And of course the trombone would sit on the tailgate or be by the tailgate because he had the slide. And that's how the king of the tailgate came about.
Now, in terms of spreading jazz to the West Coast, your father had a big part in that, correct?
Well, he was, and Oliver and Jelly Roll Morton. Those are the three key figures. Louis by that time had gone up to Chicago, and he left Fate Maribel's riverboat, and he was doing his things, and he met Lil, and then he also then went to work for Fletcher Henderson in New York. But eventually he came back and had left Oliver and started his own thing, and that's when he called my dad to come out, and that was in 25. But Louis did make a visit to the West Coast, but it was basically Oliver, my dad, and Jelly Roll that came out here. Oliver is the classic picture where you see the backdrop of all the people of color against a wall, and the slide trombone is out and the girl is dancing. That's that classic photo that's out there, and that's in Oakland.
Ah, classic. Was your father friends with Teagarden?
Oh yeah, they were really good friends. They were good enough friends that they appeared at Newport together to honor Louis. They devised this whole birthday tribute to honor him, and yeah, it was. Jack was a really nice guy. I really liked him. He and Trummy Young and Robinson were, my dad's favorite trombonists. And there's nothing more I can say about either one of them that anyone doesn't know. I mean, Trummy and Teagarden, God. And I'm still friends with Trummy's daughter to this day. We talk, and she just sent me a bunch of presents from Hawaii, and so when I go back to visit, I'm gonna probably hang out with her quite a bit, see her, and I mean, we have a lot. Our dads loved each other to bits.
Oh, that's so cool. So you must have some ties to Hawaii then. Your family lived out there for a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's a long, complicated story, but to make it short, the writer in the contract, uh, the head of Universal, screwed up and didn't honor the contract. My dad sued him with the head of the copyright law book, and Mr. Zimmer, and he got money, and he had enough money to buy a nightclub in San Francisco and to buy a house in Hawaii. And I had gotten sick, and so we bought a house on Diamond Head, and then we rented it out, had income property, and then we went back there and lived there for a brief period of time, and then came back and finally sold it. And with the money that we sold that house, we were able to buy a house out in Cocoa Head by Henry J. Kaiser. Right, I was literally like 4 minutes from Kaiser's house, maybe 3 minutes. And and it took us a little while to get in there because I wanted a swimming pool. My aspirations of having my own swimming pool to practice in for surfing. So I would go down the deep end and hold onto the drainage hole and hold my breath to practice being under the waves so I wouldn't drown when I was surfing. And it took us time to get all that and the landscaping, the fence around the pool and all that done. So we needed to rent an apartment because we'd sold the house. And no one would rent to my dad in Hawaii. Nobody would rent to him because there'd been this big fanfare when he came back and then said he was retiring here and he's going to live out his days here. And there was prejudice against people of color in Hawaii in 1966. And so Trummy was good friends with Don Ho. And Don Ho had a secret apartment in Waikiki in this building called the Governor Cleghorn. And we got an apartment there through Don Ho. And that's where we lived until the house was finished in Hawaii. And I thank Trummy's dad and Don Ho for getting us a place to live. And I made a sworn oath to my mother that my father never knew that this happened. He never had a clue that no one would rent an apartment to us. He just left the rental thing up to my mother and myself, and we handled it. We did it together, and my dad would have hit the roof because my dad, like Louis, like Billie Holiday, like a lot of people in Ellington and others, they all wanted equal rights. They wanted to have Black Lives Matter, even though there was no Black Lives Matter scenario. They wanted the equal rights. In fact, my father, along with Marl Young and other people here in LA, got the Black Musicians Union and the White Musicians Union 47 to merge. Because there were separate unions. Even in New Orleans, there was a Black union and a white union. There were Black unions, in Chicago, and they were all over. And
it's hard to believe, isn't it?
It's hard to believe that just a little over 60 years ago, this is what was going on. 60 years. We're not talking about that long ago. It didn't happen until the early 50s.
Wow.
I mean, late 40s, early 50s is when the push came to really make it, integrated. The film New Orleans, for everybody who's watching, where, they tell the story of leaving Storyville, and it was a fictionalized, script on some levels because they had to have some characters in there. But the bottom line of the movie is that Storyville was closed down by the U.S. Navy for all the servicemen getting the clap during World War I. And so they wanted to prevent more servicemen getting gonorrhea, and so they closed down all the brothels. or at least they thought they were closing down all the brothels. But the bottom line is they did what they did, and but the story to be made into a movie was because my dad had done his part for World War II. He was too old to enlist, so he was offered the gig through the auspices of Nesui Erdogan, he and his brother founded Atlantic Records, and Nesui founded Crescent Records and had the Jazzman record store. Nesui introduced my dad to Orson Welles. Later on, I introduced myself to Orson Welles as a young adult, but that's another story. And we had long stories about the whole thing. But I got this whole skinny from Orson that it was his story. It was his story, and he had made a little film called Citizen Kane, and he wanted to do this film called New Orleans because he loved, my dad's whole playing. My dad was only supposed to be on for, one gig, and he ended up being on there for 6 weeks on the radio.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's how the New Orleans jazz revival started. Through the auspices of my dad, and then Louis joined in, and Jelly Roll had just wanted to start that in 41, and then Jelly and my dad and Johnny St. Cyr were rehearsing in a little barbershop on Venice Boulevard, and that's where the play came, Jelly's Last Jam. They were rehearsing right by where the old Venice City Hall is, where they have the Beyond Baroque and everything right now, where Orson Bean just got killed. What was it, last year or the year before? I mean, that was a hot jazz neighborhood because it was Oakwood. There was Oakwood right there, and a lot of people of color lived in Oakwood. So, there's so much history about the passion for the music, the passion to bring joy to other people, the passion to make people happy by your emotions and how you blew your horn, how you phrased everything, how you handled yourself as a human being, because my dad was a stickler for people showing up on time for rehearsal, not coming drunk, not coming smoked out on marijuana. You could smoke marijuana all you wanted after the gig, but not during the gig. And you definitely didn't play over my dad. Those were his key factors. If you played over him or you took too long of a solo, you were like toast. I mean, but it would have to be, he would give you 3 warnings, and the 3rd warning, that would be it. You'd be out.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is your father credited to having the first recorded jazz trombone solo? That's been my understanding my whole life.
I think so. I think that's what it is, yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It's amazing, and but you also know too that whole thing of the Hot 5, that basically when they recorded the Hot 5, well, do you have a song? Do you have a song? We need 4 more songs, So my dad filled up the Hot 5s with his songs, but he only had a basic melody. The rest is all improvisation. How the rest of the song, all the parts, all the solos, how they all merged together. They all knew each other except for Lil. Lil didn't know my dad until he came to Chicago, but they all knew each other so well that they could just blend. And so when you learn to do a solo, it wasn't about showing off as much as just being able to let loose for a minute or two, and just you let loose and just blow and play however you want it. I mean, we're talking about brass bands here, and wood instruments. We're not talking about electric guitars. We're not talking about anything amplified. We're talking about you fill a whole room with your lungs. Whatever comes out of your lungs makes everyone move. It makes the recording happen. but this is not amplification. This is not like, you don't plug in. There's no digital, mix and fix to make it better or louder or sweeter or whatever. It is what it is. It's the person. And so my dad doing his solos, he gave every ounce that he had, everything.
That's amazing. Did he have a specific trombone that he liked to play the most?
He loved the horn that's in the Jazz Museum, the one that was with the Hot Five. He loved that one for years. That was a con. But when he was marched into Mr. Melrose' office through Barney Bigard, who had just left Ellington's orchestra, and because my dad and Barney were out crawfishing in Encino. Yeah, crawfishing in Encino. Wrap your brain around that for a minute. In the valley. How's that possible? But not today. You wouldn't want to be crawfishing out there. He says, "Well, you must be making a lot of money, Ed, for all that royalties from Muskrat Ramble and everything." He says, "I haven't seen one dime." He says, "What?" So they go down to Mr. Melrose's office, and Barney goes, "Hello, Mr. Bigard, blah, 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 and then, "I'd like to present Mr. Edward Kid Ory to you." "Oh, Mr. Ory, we've been looking for you forever." "Yeah, sure." So they write him a check for $5,000. So he goes to Earl Williams, one of the first thing he does, and he gets a custom horn made. And that horn is in my closet right now. I haven't touched it for a little bit. I had it out a couple months ago before I got sick. I was sick in February, and now I'm better. So I might bring it out again soon. I have to figure out where I'm going to put it, because there's so many musical instruments in this room at the moment. There's drums, there's Hawaiian, gourds, there's guitar, there's a bass clarinet and a clarinet behind me and an alto sax. There's a ukulele up above me. It's just like there's a piano behind me. So I have to figure out where I'm going to put the horn where it's not going to get tipped over by a cat or a dog.
Right on. Now, is there any recording that your father did that he let you know that he was the most proud of? Does anything come to mind at all?
I think the one he did when I was born, the one for Good Time Jazz. It's the pink album cover, pink and black. It says New Orleans. It says 1954 on it, and I think he was most proud because he was finally a father, and so he came down. He left me with my two half brothers and a nurse. My mom was still in the hospital, and I think that's the one that he was the most proud of, because he was able to go out and do his music. He knew I was taken care of. He knew my mom was going to be okay in the hospital and get on the mend, and my brothers were taking care of me as well. And so, he was happy. He was happy with that whole album, that whole recording. He was very happy, but he hated the studio. To put it mildly, he hated recording, but he loved making music. He just didn't like the recording process. And I think that came from when he did the first recording and Ben Borders had to put blankets in his drum because he was overpowering everyone when they were recording it on the wax cylinders for Ory's Creole trombone and Someday Sweetheart. And there were 8 recordings, and only 4 of them made it through the Mojave Desert. The rest of them melted because they had to go from LA to New York, and they went by train, and they melted. Wax cylinders. Think about that. Wax cylinders.
That's old school there.
That's really old school. But they do survive. The Ory Sunshine Orchestra, Ory's Creole trombone, Someday Sweetheart. They survive. The recordings survive. And then also they did the first live blues on KFI radio here in LA simultaneously with the release of the album in 22. But the album was made in 21. Everyone says it's made in 22 because it was released in 22. but it took a while for them to get it to New York and then to ship the product back. So, and that was done in June, and so it was really hot already in June to go through the Mojave. They probably should have waited till the fall. They probably would have lost all those, the other 8 tracks, but they did.
That was about 100 years ago. Is that amazing to think?
It's almost 100 years ago. So my goal is, this is my goal. I had raised $200,000 in 2001, just shortly before 9/11. And I was going to rebury my dad with the help of the San Francisco Traditional Jazz Foundation. Amtrak, unfortunately, was having severe financial implications, and they were about to declare bankruptcy, which I had no knowledge of previously. In any case, so I want to hook up with either a jazz foundation here in Southern California or Northern California, and relaunch my dad's burial, and also get the first recording of New Orleans style jazz by people of color landmarked on Main Street in Santa Monica. So I have already approached the Santa Monica Historical Society. They're up for it, or at least they were up for it before the pandemic. I still have until June of 2022. So that's what I would like to do, is launch this plaque and have a second line down Main Street, have you come, have all the trombonists, era, everyone come and play, and from far and wide, and do a major second line down Main Street in Santa Monica. And then we go and we start the train trip to rebury my dad. And we'll videotape that and all that entails. And I'll keep my promise to have my dad back in New Orleans and have him buried near family and have him home, which is where he wanted to be. He wanted to be back home in New Orleans.
If someone wants to help out with that, how can they get involved?
Well, right now I have the Kid Ory Society page, and they can also message me on Facebook Messenger, and that would be the best way for right this minute, because I haven't set up a GoFundMe yet or anything else for fundraising until I can hook up with a 501-3C, because I want this as a nonprofit in adventure. I also am planning on releasing music, and I have someone we're recording and cleaning up some old music of my dad's, and I am going to release music that's never been released before. So that's another project to raise some money for, but I think I need to do that as a profit for the music, and I think I need to keep the plaque and the train trip as a separate 501-3C. So I think I have to have 2 separate entities in that. But that's my goal, is to do that. Meanwhile, there is in New Orleans, or just outside of New Orleans where my dad was born, there's a man named John McCusker who has written the Ory's Creole Trombone book, the Creole Trombone. But basically it's my dad's book, and he wrote and filled in with the help of my family and must research that I helped with, and 13 years of hard labor. He released the book. He sold it. I never got paid for it other than $300 ad, and I have nothing to do with this museum, and I wish I did. He wanted me to try like 150,000. Oh, I don't have that type of money. He says, I could make you get you 15,000. I said, are you kidding me? I said, no. I said, aside from I have signed records, autographed records, I have autographed photos, I have, all my dad's, set lists, and I have all of his music history from touring. I have all of his arrangements and the ones that Bud Scott did for him. And so, no, I'm not selling it for $50,000.
Keep it in the
To sell it to a museum or somewhere that is they're going to be able to digitize it and give me a digital copy for my own personal use. I've been organizing it and getting it ready to be seen, but that's been a work in progress, and so that's what I've been focusing on. And when it gets too hot like this, I can't do a lot of work because I have to go down into the garage and organize things. But I have everything in waterproof, big tubs, and it's just been really a hard work. I have the records upstairs, and I have all the books, all my dad's old music books and other things up here. I have his old saxophone practice book from when he wrote Muskrat Ramble. He went and studied with the head of the Chicago Symphony, that had the number one chair trombonist, and that's how he learned to read and write music.
So he was about what age when that happened? He was
in his 30s.
in his 30s. Huh?
And that's when he wrote down the notes for Muskrat Ramble.
That was first recorded when, in the 20s?
25. I think 25. Maybe it's 26. So it's coming up. The anniversary's coming up. Everything's coming up.
Isn't that amazing?
But I do have derivative works of my dad's stuff. So my goal is to get other musicians to do a tribute album to my dad. And that's what Dr. John and I were working on when he passed, which is very sad. We had a conversation, and we were still in conversation, and he went on to do the country album, and then that was the last thing he recorded before he died. There's a country album of him coming out with Willie Nelson, Ricky Lee Jones, and I think there's one other person I can't remember right now. But anyway, it's one of his main things that he wanted to do before he died. But he was writing me a song. He was writing me a specific song for the album. So that probably will never see the light of day.
That's great.
But I still will do the derivative, concept album and have different people, record my dad's songs. I own half the copyrights for those. So, and even as the songs go public domain, I still have the copyright on them. So that will help. That will help raise some money.
Now, when you heard your dad practicing when you were younger, is there anything that comes to mind that you remember him working on the horn that you would like to share?
He was working on, when I was a little girl, really little, he was working on the French songs. He did an album of French songs on trombone. And I really remember that as, a really young girl. And then as I got older, he would be writing stuff. He would still be writing songs, and he would be writing and notating, and he actually would write on bass. We had his old bass, and that was in his bedroom, but he moved it out into the den so he could have more room to breathe to play it, and he would use the bow. And I actually remember him working on that a lot. I remember him working on different endings to different songs, and he would try and have a different coda here and different, he would always try and change it up. And then he would actually listen to other people's music, and he would also play other people's songs. He would listen to the record, and then he would just play it. It was the most remarkable thing he would listen to it once, and he could hear it, and he could just play it right after he heard it one time. This is a man in his 70s doing this.
Wow, this is amazing.
It's like a photographic memory of music, and just boom. he could pick up an instrument, any instrument, a drum, a ukulele, anything, and just play it, even if he'd never played it before. I mean, because he learned on a banjo that he made out of an old cottonseed oil can, string with rosin on it, and then he got his first banjo at 13. And the only reason he took trombone up because nobody else wanted to play the trombone because they thought it was too difficult to play, and he loved the trombone.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that his banjo playing influenced the way that he approached the trombone.
He learned from playing banjo and from playing bass. You know, he learned that, and he took that into his breath work and his sliding up to the notes, which is unusual, but that's how he did it. I mean, he learned music from the carpetbaggers. He learned music from everyone coming, through from Baton Rouge all the way down the Mississippi, and where he was living growing up, which he made a promise to stay there till he was 21. Actually, he stay there 2 years past 21. He didn't know that, but because he didn't have a birth certificate. He had a baptismal certificate. They didn't have birth certificates back then, and but he made a promise to stay there and marry off his sisters. And so he got all this influence from all the, Reconstruction after the Civil War and all these people coming through. And here's the river, here's the levee, here's the road, here's the house, here's the warehouse, the train tracks, and then there's the sugarcane fields. And that whole area that was the Ory plantation became part of Greater LaPlace. It was sold off and subdivided and made houses, but the acreage was huge, and it was his dad was first cousin to the owner, and my grandfather was white, and my grandmother was a person of color, and they legally couldn't marry, but the influence of her Indian Black heritage and my grandfather's acumen for business and stuff, that my grandfather started a store with one of his brother-in-laws, and who married one of his sisters, and then the whole family so we had a store. These are people that weren't hugely educated. They probably had maybe 8th grade educations, and they started businesses. And my dad started raising money to buy real musical instruments by doing fish fries and getting beer from the plantation stores. The plantation had a store, and you could buy beer and food stuffs from the store if you lived on the plantation, worked on it. Not as a slave, but as a person that worked there. Although the plantation before my family had it did have slaves, and it's where the first 1811 slave uprising happened. So that's why McCusker has started a museum there, because it's the first slave uprising location in the whole United States. So, my dad comes from a pretty impressive, background of having lost everything in Civil War, and coming up and raising his 7 sisters that lived. And he had 2 other brothers that died. And I don't remember whether it was a sister or brother that my grandmother miscarried. That would have been her 15th child. My grandmother had 14 children. That was a lot of children. And she was the wet nurse for the sugarcane plantation, for all the Orys, whether they were white or they were, our side of the family, were all nursed by her. She nursed. So every single white Ory is descended from my grandmother's milk.
Wow. And your family spoke French, right?
No, well, they originally were from France, and then they moved to Alsace, which was France, and then Alsace became part of Germany, and then they came here, and they wanted to go to Louisiana, and why Germans wanted to go to Louisiana, the governor didn't understand, or the mayor of New Orleans or whoever didn't understand, and they ended up going to Houston, and then they went to Boston, or they came from Boston, then they went to Houston first, and then they got to New Orleans, and then they were granted the right to come here. But they came from Germany. They came from Germany via France, and so first it was ORRY, and then when they came here, I guess they dropped an R and made it ORY. But I have a history of the French family that I got from Mary Ory back in the late 70s.
Now I got a question for you. Where did your dad's nickname Kid come from?
From the ladies of the evening in Storyville, in Black Storyville. Of course, there was a Black Storyville and a White Storyville, naturally. And so he looked so young, and they started calling him Kid. Hey, Kid. And he was handsome and cute, and they also, called him Kid. So that's how it started. Because my dad had been walking from LaPlace, which is 30 miles one way, to New Orleans, and walking back before he got enough money to take the train and stuff.
And his home is still there, right? On Jackson Avenue?
The home is still there on Jackson. It was actually my sister, my aunt's house, his sister's house. And that's where he got to put his first phone number, advertising on the side of the wagons. And he has Kid Ory's Jazz Band, JASS, not jazz, jazz.
Did he ever talk about why they changed the spelling?
People thought it was rude.
Because it meant something bad?
I guess people were offended, so they changed it and put Z's in.
Interesting.
But it was jazz. It was a jazz. You jerked. It was like twerking. It was their version of twerking, where you would shake your booty. But no, it was just rude. People thought you're a jackass, or you're a jostle ass, or it's like funky butt. Funky butt was okay because people had funky butts, and there were funky butts on the animals, so that was all right. But ass was a little rude, and there's a saying, in Creole, which I won't say because there could be Creoles listening. But it basically, one of the lines in Do What Ory Say says, where the sun doesn't shine. And my dad would never tell me that, and I had to learn it. I had to learn it from my first cousin. He had to tell me, Uncle. I called him Uncle Harold, but he was actually my first cousin, Harold Ory. And Harold lived out in Compton, and I would go out to see him.
So what's going on with the home now? Does anyone live in there?
Two wonderful men there. They actually got married in the house. They bought it after Annie Avery from the PRS Center, did the whole restoration of the double shotgun, and then got it landmarked. And the couple let me come in and gave me a private tour of the house some years ago, and it's wonderful. They did a great job. I have a couple bottles that were dug out of the back of the privy, and they're these old 1890s whatever bottles, and they're just beautiful opalized glass from being stuck in the dirt for so long and mud. And no, they did a really wonderful job, and I'm thankful to the PRS. If they didn't do this to save houses, it would be a shame. I wish they could have saved Louis's house a long time ago. King Oliver's house got saved, and Jelly Roll's house actually not King Oliver's. Jelly Roll's house got saved.
Now, I'm always fascinated to know what music sounded like before recording existed. And since your father lived in a time period where he did get to experience music before recording existed, did he ever talk about what music sounded like before recording existed? I'm just fascinated by that.
Um, it was vibrant. It was live. It was immediate. It brought emotions out. It changed the atmosphere. It made people dance or mourn for a funeral because he did brass band work as well, marching for funerals, second lining, and it was all about immediacy and spontaneity and taking person from whatever state they were in and transporting them to another state through the efforts of the musician. The musician was there to serve as a gateway to raise or change the vibration of the audience, of the listeners. And that's why they wanted to record music. When they did start recording, they wanted to record it live. They didn't want to have it, done like it's done now. And that's why I went up to Jack Black last year, and I praised him for his American Epic, where he did live recording and direct to disc, and did it in a small room. They rehearsed it till they got the sound that they wanted, but they just recorded it live and right to the record, and no editing, no sweetening, no nothing, just boom. And that's how music should be. It should be live and spontaneous and recorded, and shouldn't be. If you have to use auto tune, you're you're in deep trouble. You're in the wrong industry. I can always hear a sour note, even if someone else doesn't hear it. I can hear a sour note. I can hear a dissonant note. I can hear. I mean, my dad didn't send me. This is not your father's music. This is church music. Well, I had to learn church music first. I had to learn religious music. I had to learn to sing and read and write in Latin, which add that up to everything. That's
So your whole life you've been playing the trombone. Tell me more about that.
whole life I've been playing when I play. When I practice and I sit down and practice, I practice. When I don't, I'm a chef, I'm a gardener, I do art, I sew, I crochet, I do mosaics, I refinish floors. Maybe not right now, but I've done all of that. I painted houses, I've refinished redwood decks. You know,
You're creative.
I'm creative, and I have a huge garden right now, and most of it's in containers. So I have apples growing on my apple tree right now. The second batch has started.
That sounds good.
Yep, apple pie coming soon in a few months.
Yum yum.
Now, I know there's too many to name, but any trombone players come to mind that you just absolutely enjoy listening to? And I know there's so many to name, but just kind of curious what pops in your brain.
Well, I love Lucian. He was God rest his soul. I love Lucian. He was not only a really good friend. He was my age, in my age group. But with his uncle and my dad, and his uncle wrote, Bourbon Street. So Lucian was my favorite. I gotta tell you, he was just great. I love Freddie Lonzo's playing. I love Shorty's playing. Uh, there's a couple other people that I really really like. I like Scott and Dan Weinstein. I like his playing.
Oh yeah.
I love Dan's playing. And Ira Nepus. Oh my God.
Gosh, yes.
I can't forget him. I mean, he was at my dad's funeral.
Talking about Whitfield, right?
Yeah, Scott Winfield. Yeah. And who was it?
John Allred, I'm a huge fan of his.
Oh, John. Yes, John Allred. And who was it who just died not long ago? I last saw him at the NAMM show.
Was it Watros?
Watros. I loved Watros.
Oh yeah, legendary.
I loved Watros.
Yeah.
I would sit for like 45 minutes and listen to him play at NAMM. I mean, God.
It's like unhuman what he was able to do.
I was just blown away, and he and I would go and have a cup of coffee afterwards. I just like, you just made me go. I just went to heaven and came back down to earth. It's like
Right. No,
transcended. And
right.
there's a couple other musicians that I've heard that are younger, that and they're around LA, and I can't remember their names. But when I do, if we do a second interview, I will definitely write down their names and tell you. But I've met every time I meet a new trombonist, I listen to them. I sit and listen, and if I think and I hear something in there and I hear something really, really worthwhile, I go up and say who I am and who my dad was. And there was this one 16-year-old boy who was playing, and I forget where, but he was amazing. And I went up and talked to him. And he was like, "Oh my God." And I said, "No, don't, oh my God." I said, "Just keep doing what you're doing and practice and make sure your heart is always in it." Because that's what my dad said. If you're only doing it to make money, you're in the wrong business. This is not about making money. You might get blessed and you might make money, but you got to always do your music because you love music and because you have to get it out there. It's in you. It's coming. It has to release. It has to go out and spread its joy, or its express its sorrow, or whatever it is. But you have to put it out there. You can't hold it in. And if you are expecting to get rich from it, that's not the outcome of music. Music is about your expression and giving it away to others.
Wise words.
That's it. That's all I have to say on that note.
That's beautiful, Babette. Now, next time we do this, we got to do it in person. All right.
And I will make you my best genmai sushi, and some I'll probably make you a good stuffed kobacha. I make the best stuffed kobacha with azuki beans and Japanese mountain potato and vegetables. You'll love that.
Sounds fun.
Yep.
Well,
And for anyone that wants to support the cause and to help you out on your mission, how can they get a hold of you?
Kid Ory Society on Facebook, or you can find me at Babette Ory on Messenger, and just send me a private message. And when I have the foundation of the 501-3C set up, I will let everyone know. And then when I need to raise the money for the recording transfers and the recording releases, I will set up another GoFundMe for that. So one will be nonprofit and one will be for profit.
awesome.
And the nonprofit one will be the plaque and the reburial. So I need to raise at least $25,000 just for the reburial. It's $10,000 just to dig my father up. I know it sounds morbid, but it is $10,000 to exhume my dad. And then I have to buy a new casket, and then I have to store him in cold storage until I move him. That's the health laws of the LA County.
Interesting.
I know. So I mean, that's an endeavor. It's an endeavor, and whether we do the train trip or whether we fly and go to New Orleans with the casket and then we just film it in New Orleans, but one way or another, I will have a free place to bury him in New Orleans. I don't have to pay for that. I just have to have money to keep the crypt area clean because of birds and everything. It's above ground, and so I need a perpetuity fund to go for that, and that'll be part of the 501-3C. So, but the music, I definitely need to make a little bit of money, so the music is going to be for profit.
Sounds good. Awesome. Thanks for coming on here today.
And take care, and a big hug to your wife.
I will tell her you said that.
Okay.
Okay.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Babette, for being a part of Bone Masters. Wow, that was fascinating. Comment down below one takeaway that you learned that you did not know before inside the comment section, and be sure to subscribe, turn on the notifications if you enjoy the trombone as much as I do. This is Paul the Trombonist. I appreciate you guys so much, and signing off. See you on the next one.